The most consistently watched detective drama on British television is filmed entirely in a French overseas territory, staffed largely by French crew, yet somehow draws 7 to 9 million viewers an episode, without anyone seeming to notice how improbable the whole arrangement is. Death in Paradise is a show built on a series of secrets hiding in plain sight, and the strangest of them have nothing to do with any of the murders. Fact 1. The station is in France.
Minor stab wound in upper back, major stab wound in the chest.
Sainte Marie, the fictional Caribbean island where Detective Inspector Richard Poole arrived in 2011, looking thoroughly unhappy about it, does not exist. The real location is Deshaies, a small fishing village on the northwest coast of Guadeloupe, a French overseas department, and, therefore, legally and constitutionally part of France. When viewers watch a British detective investigating murders in what appears to be a British Caribbean island, they are watching a British production filmed on French soil. The production based itself in Deshaies from the very first series. The police station, the beach bar, the market square, all of them are real, locations in a French-speaking community whose residents have watched a British drama turn their village into an internationally recognized television set. The cast and crew descend each year to film, the locals appear as extras, and the whole enterprise is conducted, logistically, as a French production as much as a British one. Guadeloupe itself is no more Sainte Marie than Blockley is Kembleford, or Harrogate is Agatha Christie's imagination. The island has its own character, its own politics, its own relationship to France that has nothing to do with the warm, frictionless British Caribbean idyll on screen. The show keeps this ambiguity intact with considerable care, never identifying the real location on screen, never drawing attention to the gap between the fiction and the geography. What this means in practice is that the most reliably English thing about Death in Paradise, its BBC coziness, its gentle murders, its succession of uncomfortable British detectives, is packaged and delivered from a place that has never been part of Britain at all. The show's central joke, the fish out of water, turns out to apply to the production itself. Poole was the lead, the anchor, the character around whom the entire format had been constructed. And then, in the opening episode of Series 3, he was stabbed with a sharpened spike and died on St. Marie's beach. What made this still more surprising was that it was Ben Miller's own decision. He had concluded, after 2 series, that Richard Poole had reached his natural end, that the character had nowhere left to go that would justify continuing. He approached the producers and asked to leave. The production, faced with losing its leading man, did not scale back or conclude the series. It killed Poole properly, on screen, and began looking for a replacement. The calculated risk this represented was considerable. A detective drama in which the detective dies mid-run and is simply replaced, they did not fall. They rose. Chris Marshall arrived as the shambling, well-meaning D.I. Humphrey Goodman, and the audience followed without significant defection. Miller's departure had, counterintuitively, energized the show, forced it to reinvent itself in ways that turned out to be sustainable across the next decade. Death in Paradise discovered, by accident, that it was not about any particular detective at all. Fact 3. Losing stars made it stronger. Once Ben Miller had left and the ratings had held, the producers understood something important about what they had built. Death in Paradise was not a character drama in the conventional sense. It was a format, a set of relationships, a setting, a comic and dramatic structure that could survive the departure of its central figure, because the format itself was the attraction. The specific detective was almost incidental. This realization shaped everything that followed. When Chris Marshall decided to leave after Series 7, the production did not panic. When Ardal O'Hanlon followed after Series 9, the formula absorbed the change again. When Ralph Little departed at the end of Series 13 in 2024, the show was already in casting conversations for its 5th lead detective. Each departure has been managed as a creative opportunity rather than a crisis. Humphrey Goodman was warmer and more chaotic. Jack Mooney, played by Ardal O'Hanlon, brought an Irish melancholy to the role that distinguished him from his predecessors. Ralph Little's Neville Parker was allergic to almost everything the island could produce, sun, sand, tropical fruit, which gave his discomfort a physical comedy that the earlier leads had not explored. The unspoken rule is that each new detective must find a new version of the core problem.
Always thinking people were trying to stab him in the back.
To be fair, someone did.
Fact 4. It made France famous. Before Death in Paradise began filming in 2011, Deshaies was a quiet fishing community on Guadeloupe's leeward coast. It had a market, a church, a harbour, and the kind of unhurried Caribbean life that attracts visitors who already know where to look. It was not, by any standard measure, an international tourist destination. That changed with remarkable speed. As the show grew in popularity and began selling to territories across Europe, Australia, and North America, viewers who recognized the village from the screen began making deliberate pilgrimages to see it. The beach bar where the detectives drink became a real bar, serving real tourists who had come specifically because of the BBC. The police station exterior, a real building, became a photographed landmark. The economic impact on Deshaies has been documented by the local tourist board and by the Guadeloupe regional government, both of which have cited the show explicitly as a driver of visitor numbers. The French government, Guadeloupe, being, remember, constitutionally, France has noted the unusual situation of a British television drama functioning as an effective promotional campaign for a French overseas territory. There is a particular irony in this. The show's conceit is that Sainte Marie is a British island with British institutions, British procedures, and British detectives. The actual Guadeloupe has none of these things. French tourists now visit their own overseas territory to see the set of a British drama about a fictional version of somewhere else. The layers of unreality involved have not noticeably reduced anyone's enjoyment. Fact 5. It never films in winter. Death in Paradise is set on an island where, apparently, it is always warm, always bright, and always the kind of weather that makes a British detective in a suit look maximally uncomfortable. This is not an accident of the drama. It is a production decision enforced by the filming schedule, which takes place in Guadeloupe's dry season every year without exception. Guadeloupe has 2 distinct seasons. The dry season, running roughly from January to June, offers the reliable sunshine and clear skies that the show requires. Death in Paradise draws heavily from the over 55s, the age group that watches television in the way television used to be watched, at a fixed time, on a screen in the living room, with consistent loyalty across a full series. The popular imagination from Father Dougal Maguire, the magnificently dim young priest from the Channel 4 sitcom Father Ted, which ran from 1995 to 1998 and has never quite left the national consciousness since. Dougal Maguire was one of the great comic creations of 1990s British television. Guileless, uncomprehending, incapable of grasping the simplest theological or practical proposition, and played by O'Hanlon with such complete commitment that the character became genuinely iconic. Taking the same actor and casting him as a competent, if melancholy, senior detective required audiences to perform a significant imaginative leap. O'Hanlon made it easier than it had any right to be. Jack Mooney was written with a sadness and a warmth that gave O'Hanlon room to demonstrate a register, the opposite of a priest. Fact 8. Fans brought her back. Josephine Joubert joined Death in Paradise in Series 6 as DS Florence Cassel, a local Sainte Marie detective whose competence and warmth made her an immediate favourite with the show's audience. She left after Series 7 when Chris Marshall's Humphrey Goodman departed, and the expectation was that her exit would be as permanent as most cast changes on a show that cycles through its ensemble with some regularity. It was not. Joubert returned to the series several years later, rejoining the cast in a later run to considerable audience pleasure. The return was unusual for a format that generally moves forward rather than back, that adds new characters rather than recovering old ones. It was also, by various accounts, driven significantly by the response of the show's fanbase, whose attachment to the character of Florence had not diminished during her absence. This kind of audience-led casting decision is rarer than it might appear. Broadcasters and producers do not typically reverse departures in response to viewer feeling partly because the logistics are complicated, and partly because returning characters rarely recapture the dynamic that made them popular in the first place. Jobert's return worked because Florence had left on terms that left the character's story unfinished, and because the audience had never quite accepted that the story was over. By the time of her return, Jobert had appeared in more series of Death in Paradise than almost any other cast member. A character who left and came back has outlasted several of the detectives she served under, becoming one of the longest-running continuous threads in a show that has otherwise been in constant flux. The fans who wanted her back turned out to be right. Fact 9. One idea, 14 series. Death in Paradise was created by Robert Thorogood, a writer whose previous television credits were relatively modest when he brought the concept to the BBC. The pitch was disarmingly simple. A British detective, constitutionally unsuited to warmth, colour, and informality, is sent to solve crimes on a Caribbean island where everything about the environment is designed to make him miserable. The comedy and the drama would emerge from that single collision. Thorogood was a devotee of classic detective fiction, the Golden Age puzzles of Agatha Christie, the careful plotting of writers who believed that the mystery should be genuinely solvable if the reader paid close enough attention. He wanted Death in Paradise to honour that tradition. Proper clues, fair play with the audience, solutions that surprised but did not cheat. The Caribbean setting was the innovation. The detective structure was deliberately classical. The BBC commissioned the pilot, which aired in 2011 to strong initial figures. What Thorogood could not have anticipated was quite how durable the format he had designed would prove to be. A concept simple enough to be explained in a single sentence has sustained 14 series, 5 lead actors, and an international audience across more than a decade. The best formats tend to be the ones that are easiest to describe. Thorogood has continued to write for the show throughout its run, remaining involved as a writer and executive producer. He has also extended the world he created into prose fiction, writing a series of novels featuring a Death in Paradise adjacent detective. The single idea that became a BBC commission became, over time, a franchise built on a premise so straightforward that it is remarkable nobody had thought of it before. Fact 10. Still running, still surprising. In 2025, Death in Paradise entered its 14th series, an achievement that places it among the longest-running detective dramas in BBC history. Most shows that reach double figures in series count do so by finding a stable formula and executing it reliably. Death in Paradise has done something more difficult. It has reinvented its central premise 5 times while keeping the audience that came for the original version. The casting of Don Gillet as D.I. Mervyn Wilson for Series 14 brought a new dimension to the format that none of the previous transitions had attempted. Wilson is a British detective of Caribbean heritage, returning to a world he has a prior relationship with a different kind of outsider, one whose discomfort is less about the heat than about the complicated personal history that the island represents. The fish-out-of-water formula has been inverted, and the show is discovering what that inversion makes possible. What the show has never done is mistake its own comfort for complacency. The willingness to lose a lead actor, to recast the central role, to find a new version of the same problem with each new face, spent 14 years proving that the premise, at least, was exactly right.